Welcome to the Hunting Beast Report, a live video podcast with Dan Infalt and host Jeremy Gillespie.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Stealth Outdoors. The off-season's a great time to rehab your gear, so head on over to Stealth Outdoors at www.stealthoutdoors.com to pick up some climbing stick wraps, cam buckle covers, platform cable wraps, or stealth strip rolls for all of your miscellaneous silencing needs. Today's show is also made possible by Hunting Beast Gear, innovators in mobile hunting gear and the designers of the Beast Sticks and Beast Stand. Check out the latest products at www.huntingbeastgear.com. And now, on to the podcast. All right, Dan, we're live. We're going to do some question and answers show today. Got a lot of questions from the Facebook page that we've got queued up, and we're going to take live questions as well. Before we do that, you spent the weekend at the Wisconsin Dells Sportsman's Expo. Give me a recap. How'd that go? And did you get a chance to meet a lot of the people from the Beast Nation out there?
Oh yeah, it was pretty fun. It was a crazy show. It was like the shows were back in the early '90s. It was so packed. It's probably the best show in the Midwest, I think. I mean, it's a great area. There's a lot to do. Great show. So yeah, we had a lot of fun. It was a blast.
And then Uncle Lou is there, right? Big product announcement. For those that don't know or didn't make it to the show, Uncle Lou has two new products out. One's a jacket, it's like a shirt jacket, and then another one's a hooded jacket. So try to pull those up real quick since Uncle Lou is a sponsor of the show, and we appreciate that.
They're both kind of full-blown like coats. One's got no hood, one does, but they're pretty nice.
Yeah, so this is the shirt jacket, and it's a Stealth Outdoors Beast Gear collaboration, which is pretty cool. It's got the Beast Gear Arrowhead logo on the pocket, and then I think, see if I can get back. Here's the other one. So hooded jacket, Beast Gear. And Dan, you saw them in person. I haven't got a chance to pick one up yet. What do you think about those?
Well, yeah, I kind of helped him with it. I mean, he's got a professional clothing designer helping him design it. So it's got like quiet zippered pockets and all that kind of stuff, and the deep pockets you need for hunting and stuff.
Nice.
What I helped with is I wanted it to be plaid because that's what I like. So I helped him with the color, and I wanted something that would blend in the woods at most scenarios. And I like a coat where it doesn't really look like a hunting coat. It just it blends in, and you can kind of just fade off into the woods and people don't notice. I don't really like standing out like a hunter and, head to toe camo at places, so that's just my personal preference. But Lou went with that, and we were talking about some other ideas too, but I really like the coat. It's really warm. Wore it all weekend.
Yeah, it seems like plaids and solids are coming back quite a bit. So that's, I imagine that's going to be a good seller. You didn't have any ideas to go with the polka dot pattern like the boots you and Eric saw in the UP?
No.
Could have a signature model there, Dan. So, well, we got a couple of news articles we're going to talk about. The first one, sad article. Let me pull that one up. And if people haven't heard, there was a mountain lion attack in California, El Dorado County. And Dan, you sent me an article, but I was actually able to find a post from the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office that gives some more details. So that's what I've got pulled up here. And I'll kind of paraphrase the article, but there's two brothers, Talon and Wyatt, and they were out looking for shed antlers in California. They were walking along a dirt roadway, looking at the edges and the woodlands. They observed a mountain lion walk up to the road from the lower side. The lion saw and approached the two. Both Talon and Wyatt did what they had always learned. They raised their hands in the air to appear larger, yelled at the lion. Wyatt even threw his backpack at the lion, all in an attempt to scare it away. Instead of retreat, the lion immediately charged. Wyatt bit down on his face and took Wyatt to the ground. Talon, the other brother, beat and yelled at the lion. Wyatt was able to wrestle the lion to the ground. With him on top of the lion began clawing at Wyatt's midsection, causing Wyatt to release his grip. At this point, the lion released Wyatt, got up and charged at Talon, biting him in the throat and taken Talon to the ground. Wyatt, with severe lacerations to his face, beat and then grabbed the lion in an attempt to get him to release Talon. After some time trying to get the lion off Talon, Wyatt tried to call 911. With limited cell service in the area, Wyatt ran back towards where they had parked his vehicle, eventually obtained cell service, called 911. After calling 911, Wyatt got into his vehicle, drove to where he'd left Talon and the lion in hopes the presence of his vehicle would scare the lion off, but when he arrived, Talon and the lion were gone. Wyatt drove back to the intersection of Darling Ridge and Skid Road, where he met El Dorado County deputies who rendered first aid until medics arrived. The medics then transported Wyatt to the Marshall Medical Hospital in Placerville, where he was evaluated and transported to UC Davis in Sacramento for reconstructive surgery. Wyatt is at home and recuperating from the tragic ordeal. After leaving Wyatt in the care of the medics, deputies responded to the area described by Wyatt where the attack took place and began searching the area. Nearby, away from the roadway, they observed a mountain lion crouching near the body of a male subject, later determined to be Talon. They did not know at the time if Talon was alive or not. Due to the close proximity of the lion, they could not fire their weapons. So they fired nearby in a safe direction, hoping to scare the lion away so they could render aid. The lion did run away, and upon reaching Talon, they found he had succumbed to the lion attack and was deceased. Instead of tracking the lion at that point, knowing that it would probably travel a great distance, they stayed with Talon. The California Department of Fish and Game, along with El Dorado County trapper, arrived in the area, tracked the lion approximately 100 yards, where it was found, treed, and dispatched. So pretty crazy story. I think I read in another article that was the first fatal mountain lion attack in like 20 years.
Mm-hmm. It's probably going to be a lot more since all the tree huggers out there wanted to save the lions and outlawed hunting them. And a lot of us, including me, when that happened, said they're going to have some problems out there. Because, you know, if you don't control mountain lions, what they do is they reach, kind of like the wolves in Wisconsin, they reach a peak number where they eat all their food sources, and there's still a lot of them around, and they got to eat something. And then they'll eat people. They'll go into town. They'll get braver and braver. And it's sad. It's really sad. It sounds like they came on the mountain lion actually eating them the way it was described.
Yeah. I think that's what was going on, and they didn't want to say it. I did read in another article. I don't have that one pulled up, but it said in another article that they normally would have firearms, but they didn't because it was youth turkey season or junior turkey season in California. And basically they didn't want to get harassed for the game wardens saying, why do you have a gun if you're just out shed hunting or whatever? So I think, picking on California a little bit, the gun culture there, if it wasn't the way it is, that they might've had firearms and probably, or potentially avoided that whole situation. So pretty unfortunate there.
If the culture wasn't the way it was, they'd be controlling the lions too, instead of, letting inner city tree huggers decide the fate of the lion population. Literally there was a vote on it, and the inner city people outvoted the country people. Everybody in the country voted to hunt the lions, and everybody in the cities, which far outnumber the country, voted to protect the lions. And the people that are in the cities don't have any experience with lions. They don't know nothing about them. They think they're a fuzzy, cool critter.
Yeah, it sounds like there's been some initiatives in Colorado to do the same kind of thing, trying to end lion hunting in Colorado.
Yeah, sad.
And then we're gonna one other article here we got, and this one that comes out of Wisconsin. So new research: Wisconsin deer hunting numbers are still falling. And Dan, you sent this one to me. It says, I'll just read the first paragraph here. More females and crossbow hunters joined Wisconsin's deer hunting ranks the past decade, but they didn't halt the state's nearly 20-year decline in hunter numbers and license sales. That's one takeaway from a recent Department of Natural Resources study by the agency's science operations staff. The team studied 18 years of detailed license data gathered since 2005 by the agency's high-tech ALIS licensing system. Software allows the DNR to precisely track and analyze the ages, gender, success rates, and license buying patterns of hunters, anglers, and trappers throughout their lifetime. So, Dan, you got any comments on declining hunter numbers in Wisconsin?
Yeah, I read that, and the numbers were quite large. I mean, the decline-wise. And it was interesting because they made some comments in there like hunters are claiming it's because of lack of deer, but that's not true, because there's a rising population of deer or something to that degree. And it says that then how come squirrel hunters aren't hunting? There aren't more squirrel hunters because there's more squirrels and crap like that. So the truth of the matter is they just don't want to raise the population of deer, and people are really sick of these stupid T zones and doe seasons and all this crap. And then they want to just get a buck, and they can't even get one because the population is getting depleted on the public lands. And it's sad, but I mean that the percentage wise, what was it like? I mean, like in 20 years, it was something like 19 or 20% decline. I mean, it was huge.
Yeah, pretty big.
I might have that number wrong. I can't remember, but I remember looking at it, it was huge. It's basically they don't manage the population right. They don't manage the deer right. If people saw a deer and hunting was fun, you know, more people would do it. It's kind of the reason that I want to educate people on how to hunt, because if they have success, they'll stay in it and stay doing it. You know, but your average person, if they don't have a mentor that, you know, really knows what he's doing, they're going to have a hell of a time if they go into public land and try to learn how to hunt. They're going to have a hard time finding deer. I find deer because I know where to look, but you know, your average person, if he doesn't have a mentor, is going to have a problem.
Yeah,
and that's what the issue is.
I looked back, it said in 2005 there were 672,000 hunters, and then 2022 there was 607,000. So basically 70,000 down. And it said the bulk of that decline actually has happened since 2014. So just the last 10 years, you lost 50,000 of those 70,000. So it's really gone downhill the last 10 years.
Yeah, I know 10 years ago there was a male hunters were declining and female hunters were rising real heavy. Now it says that they're both declining rapidly.
Well, Dan, we're going to do question and answers today. So we just wanted to cover those news articles, interesting stuff. We always try to cover some interesting articles as part of the show. So you put a post out on the forum and on the Facebook page about questions and answers. So for people that are watching the live show, we're going to grab a few of those to start out, and then we're going to move into questions from the live audience. So Dan, first question is from Jeff Brown. It says, what states are you planning on hunting this year? And at what point will you retire so you can just travel and hunt without work? I assume that work means day job, not hunting beasts, because that's still work too, right? You're working right now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, this is the hardest work I do right here.
Yeah.
You putting me on the spot with all this pressure, right?
That's live too. Jeez.
So I'm probably going to hit Kansas. I think I'm going to draw Kansas. I would really like to hit Illinois. I haven't hunted in Illinois in years. And I may try to put together a non-quota bear hunt in Minnesota. And other than that, wherever the wind blows me. See how I do in Wisconsin. You know, if I tag out here, I'm probably going to be doing a lot more road trips. As far as retirement, I mean, kind of like having insurance, and you know, they don't really work me too hard. I kind of come and go as I please. So it's kind of set my own hours kind of thing. As long as they're somewhat reasonable, you know, they don't mind if I float around and go hunting. I think they kind of like it. You know, my boss, the supervisor of my department even came over today. We were having a retirement party. That's usually what we do at work. We just rotate through parties and events and stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like a good gig. You guys hiring by chance?
Today was a party for a retirement party, and the supervisor says to me, he's while we're sitting there eating cake and pizza, he says, you know, my daughter's fiance or whatever over at the house, he says he's a big hunter, and he says I mentioned I work with you, and now all of a sudden his whole family wants autographs. Like, you're kidding me. He's like, no. I'm like, gets a little weird. So, but yeah, I don't really plan on retiring anytime soon. You never know. Sooner or later I will.
Yeah,
I like machining as much as I like hunting. I like inventing new products. I like working on things. So I don't feel any need to. It's not really like I think a lot of younger people think it's a dream to hunt all the time and stuff. I mean, I have other passions in my life. I think if I was younger, I think I'd think about it even more. Just doing the hunting thing.
Sure.
But I'm having fun and pretty much hunting every day, anyways.
Hard to beat. Next question's from Kyle Benedict. Says he wants some tips on hunting clear cuts, specifically in flat land. I kind of abbreviated his question, but I think he was looking for Michigan. But that's basically similar to Wisconsin. So I guess think of those states or any flat state with clear cuts. What's your favorite approach there?
In flatland, one of the most important things to look at in flatland is elevation change, because there's no such thing as flat. Slight elevation change will matter. Just little high spots, it changes vegetation, changes tree types and stuff, and that'll make a huge difference in those clear cuts. We kind of got into that last time we were on here. The aspen clear cuts are the best ones in the 1 to 3 years. Sometimes the oaks and the maples and stuff last more than that. But those aspen, I mean, are like a heavy food source as well as cover when they have leaves. But within those clear cuts, as they grow and get thick, a lot of times in a lot of places, like I know in Wisconsin, they do it. At least they're starting to now do it more than they have in the past. They leave little islands of cover or islands of trees in the middle of them and stuff. Those islands will be just like an island in a swamp. And they're doing it for that reason, to give deer and bears and stuff like that cover. And then the biggest thing is that you can look at openings and stuff in that clear cut, because there'll be spots where they had equipment moving around and stuff doesn't grow as well, and there'll be openings and stuff. And that'll work too, just like it'll create edge and stuff. But the big one for me on those clear cuts is downwind sides. So the downwind side of that thick brush. And what they'll do is they'll get just into that thick brush, and they'll look out into the open forest on the downwind side, and they'll smell any danger or hear any danger coming from within, and they'll be able to watch the forest in front of them. And that's what they really seem to like. And then if you take that one step further, if there's a little bit of elevation along that downwind side, they're going to get up somewhere high where they got a good view, and they can get the wind over the top, kind of like leeward. And if they don't, or if they do, changes in that line, that's, if you imagine a straight line, one side's the thick clear cut, one side's the open forest. When they cut that, there's no such thing as a straight line. It gets a little jagged. It gets to be a little, points and fingers coming off of that in some degree, or changes in the topography that they go around and they don't cut something because of the topography. And they have little bowls and points and stuff, and those shape changes will create areas like little points of thick cover where a deer can sit in that point, have cover, and be able to monitor all the way around them, just like a point going into a marsh or a point in hill country. So look at those shapes and stuff, but don't expect those mature bucks to be just bedded in the middle of a square clear cut. They're not. Generally, they're on the edges. You'll find does and stuff up in the open areas and the clear cuts. That's not to say they're not in those clear cuts, but the majority of them are going to be on the edges. Or if there's an island in there, or an area where there's a few big trees, that's where they'll be.
Oh, a bunch of good tips there for sure. Switching gears from clear cuts, Michael Dirks asks, what's the most important thing to keep in mind in farm country?
Farm country. The way deer bed. I think the most important thing that people overlook in farm country is like if you're hunting openings like food plots or farm fields, and you've got small timber, so you really can't penetrate it heavy. A lot of people will have like a small area, like a food plot, or let's say a portion of a field where big bucks are coming in there, and they'll watch them come in daily, and they'll wait for that right day, the right wind. So they want that wind blowing out of the woods into their face when they go in there. And when the problem is this, that in farm country, if you make it flat and all the same, those square wood lots where they bed, they're going to bed on the downwind side of those blocks of timber. So they would prefer to be on that downwind side watching that crop or that food plot or that food, monitoring it to make sure it's safe. So they'll bed right on the edge of that woods with the wind to the back, watching that field. So if you go in there and you hunt it when the wind is perfect for you, they're watching you access. But if you go in there on a just off wind, where the wind's blowing off to the side or something, not blowing into the deer, but you can go in there on a wind to back, kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or an angle. You'll get those deer bedding further back, smelling the danger, watching something else. They'll either bed on the other side of the wood lot and walk to the food plot, or they'll bed into the next transition, but they won't be right on the edge looking out because of the way they bed safety wise. You know, but if that wind is blowing to the food source, expect them to be on that thick edge, watching that food plot, and then you're going to have a hard time setting up. So you kind of got to look for that wrong wind a lot and how you can hunt it in farm country.
Yeah, my 2 cents on farm country is some of the better, bigger bucks I saw were bedded in what would, not for necessarily the hunting beast, but for the general public would be unusual places. And we talked about it on the hunting beast, small grassy areas in a cornfield where you had a wet spot and maybe just a tree or two in there, you know, those little islands, types like that, out of the way spots. And I think a lot of guys see a wood lot and they think, like you just said, kind of like the clear cut, the big bucks in the middle of the wood lot. Not necessarily. They end up in weird spots, or you've talked about it a lot, like behind an old abandoned farmstead, you know, right up next to the barn or something.
They just don't live in woods.
Right.
I mean, really, woods is the worst place for a deer, and everybody thinks that's where they live. It's really not where they live. They want cover, and they want, you know, grasses and things like that, brush, and they like a small area so that they can monitor anything coming into it. You know, so they do like tree lines. They like, you know, if you got some sort of CRP grass and then you got like some brush in the middle of it, like a little island of it that's only like the size of a car, I would be looking at that. I'd be looking at that close.
Yeah. So getting back to Michael Dirks, I would say check out some unconventional spots and keep bedding in mind for sure. Well, Dan, we're all over the map here. We were in flatland, clear cuts, farm country. Now we got a question about hill country. So Aiden Harm says he's hunting thick bulls in hill country. There's a lot of swirling winds, and he's wondering how he should set up. And he mentioned that there's a community scrape towards the bottom. Should he set up there? And he also says there's deer bedding everywhere. There's acorns in the middle. I assume he means the middle of the bowl, and crops up top. So what's your best approach to that setup?
You know, what I'm going to say is that those deer are not bedded in the bottom usually, the bigger bucks. They're going to be bedded up on the hillside above that bottom. And that scrape that he's talking about is probably in a position where they can smell all the deer around there is why it's there. So they could smell the hillside when the thermals are dropping all to that point. You know, and during the day, thermals are rising up to those beds. So there's, you know, that's a hard nut to hunt down low. You know, you almost got to be back further so you get out of the thermal activity and that wind swirl, or hunt above them by the crops, you know, and then you can get the just off winds and stuff, and it gets a little easier. But the biggest trick for him, in my eyes, would be to not just say deer are bedding everywhere and just kind of assume, would be to get in there now and look where the biggest bucks are bedding. Look at the beds, find the beds of the big bucks, not generally the deer. Care less about the general population of deer in all the beds. Find the positions in the bedding areas that hold the big bucks and figure out the setups now. Otherwise, you're going to struggle with that again next year. There is no simple answer of just going in there and, hunt by the scrape or hunt by the corn or, I mean, there's tricks. I mean, you can get in there, close and wait till the thermals start dropping and then run in to hunt below them. You can hunt those valleys. If it's a bowl, they generally have one open end. If you can get the wind blowing right through there down that bowl, if you get far enough back, you'll have the wind and the thermal that when it drops going the same direction. Makes it a lot easier to hunt that. But you really got to go in there and look at those beds. That's the only way you're really going to know exactly how they're moving around there. And from the beds, follow the trails off.
Yeah, I did a podcast on my channel a while back with a guy named Ethan Eskew. He's a young guy, but he's a really, really experienced killer. I think last year he killed 6 bucks and the year before 5, something like that. He's killed a couple high country mule deer and a bear and all sorts of stuff now. And he grew up in West Virginia, and he's real good in the hill country. And he talked a lot about like going to these areas in the spring on different wind velocity days and taking milkweed, because you get different thermal tunnels depending on the wind speed. And he's like, a couple areas I can only hunt when it's calm, or a couple areas I need a 15 to plus mile per hour wind. So might be worth investigating on a couple different wind speed days what your scent's doing in that area. Might change it up quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's one buck that I shot in hill country, one real old big 8-pointer. I knew he was moving between his bedding area and a doe bedding area, and the window between them was really short, and there's just a little opening to hunt in there. And what I did was I had to hunt upwind of it, and you had the thermal drop. I had a short period of time, so I climbed a tree, and milkweed would drop right into that opening. You just couldn't hunt it. So what I did was I climbed really high, and I got above the trees that were around there. And then my wind blew over, and I was golden. And when that buck came in, he never smelt me, and I shot him. So, I mean, just by getting in the right height in the tree.
Yeah, there's often a solution, even if it's not the first one that comes to mind. So
it's a really, really important thing is you do have to be a thinker. You can't just think that there's an answer to everything if it's in writing or something. You have to be able to look at a scenario and go, how could I beat this? You know what I mean? It's more than just, I can't do this. I mean, that's one of the things that I do that I don't think a lot of people do. It's hard to explain, but I'll find a deer in one of those scenarios. And a lot of these really big bucks that I find are in some scenario where it's almost impossible to kill them, and that's why they're there. And what I'll do is I'll just keep going back to that area, trying to figure out where's the Achilles heel? How do I get in here? How do I kill them? And if you think about it enough and you try hard enough, and you take a couple risks, you got a shot.
Dennis Adelmeyer's got a question. How do you think the knowledge available today can help young hunters, and compare that to when you were cutting your teeth? And I'm going to add one thing on to Dennis's question. How can it help hunters, and how can all the knowledge available today hurt hunters?
Yeah, that's a deep topic. So, I mean, how can't it help hunters? I mean, the knowledge base that's out there now is overwhelming. I mean, just the stuff I released. Most guys from my era kept all that stuff as deep, dark secrets. I put it out there, and now a lot of other people are putting it out there. And it's easy, and it's at their fingertips. I mean, they could pick up a DVD, from the beast. They could watch your YouTube videos. They could do a lot of things and learn stuff really quick that cuts their knowledge so fast. It's incredible. I always wonder, like, some of these young kids now that are coming into this, if I had that back then, how much more advanced I'd be now. I wonder how these young kids are going to be advanced, when they're my age and I'm gone. It's interesting. But there's also a lot of bad knowledge out there. I mean, there's the one problem with this release of info and this, everybody giving topics freely is when I started out in this, you had to be somebody you had to prove yourself. You had to prove yourself before anybody wanted to even listen to you. And the platforms were like you could get on a TV show or something. There wasn't the Facebooks or the media that there is now. So nowadays, you got a lot of these people who, I don't know how else to put it. They're young guys or whatever. They go out and they kill 2 deer or something, and they finally kill a 3-year-old or something that ain't even a mature buck, and pretty soon they're an expert. And then they're out doing podcasts, they're doing shows, they got a YouTube channel, and they're out telling people how to hunt. And the people that they're telling how to hunt have literally shot way more deer and have way more experience than these kids, and it's easy to start getting that info mixed up. I do hear a lot of bad advice, so there's a lot of that out there. My take on that is, if you're confused, look at the person's resume, look at what he's killing and where he's hunting, because that's another thing. I mean, a lot of guys, I know guys that are very, very looked up to in the hunting industry, because of the amount of giant bucks they kill. But literally, they've just got, a $10,000 lease on some golden land, or their daddy owns a farm or something, and they rotate through the same 3 stands. And, there's 16-year-old kids that hunt better than them and know more. But because of where they're at, they do better. It's the same thing as if you took a guy like me and you put me in West Virginia, I probably wouldn't kill as many deer. You know what I mean? I'm sure I'd still kill a few, but you know what I mean? Your position and where you're at makes a huge difference. So you got to take some of that stuff in perspective. If you're filtering info, who is this guy that's giving me this info? What's his background? What's his age? How long's he been hunting? And what's he got under his belt? That's huge. So I guess I went off on a little bit of a tangent, but that's kind of my take on that question.
Yeah, the 1 or 2 things that comes to mind for me is, with all the information, I've seen it myself and with some of my friends, especially when we were first getting started, like on the forums and the beat stuff. It's 10, 12 years ago now, but paralysis by analysis. When you're new and you have all this information, it's hard to process it and make a decision and trust your gut, because your gut isn't really developed. So I think it's a little harder maybe at first, because you do have all that information, but you don't necessarily have the experience yet to apply it intelligently.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the big thing is like, I lay everything out there. I mean, you can get these DVDs, you can look at my videos, and you can see exactly what I do. It's spelled flat out, and you can copy it to T and go onto properties and hunt. But in reality, no matter how hard I try or other people try, it's pretty difficult to give somebody 100% grasp when they watch a video or they watch a show.
Yeah.
It pretty much, what I've noticed is when a guy really digs in deep enough to understand the concepts, it still takes him about 3 years before he starts really getting good. And that's only if he really has the drive and he wants it really bad and he really tries hard. It takes about 3 years to really start getting good at it. Now, I've had guys that, first year they start killing big stuff, but maybe it's their situation's better, they're in a better property or whatever. But I mean, don't expect it to change overnight. Expect it to be a gradual change. I think what fools a lot of people is like, if they've never hunted like beast style, when they first start getting into it and they go out scouting, they're going to walk into their first bedding area that's, used by a good buck, and they're going to see these giant rubs and stuff and worn in beds, and they're going to go, holy crap, this is it. I'm going to kill the buck right here. And literally, I'm hunting a spot like that every time I go out, and still it takes me a season to get a big buck, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not as easy as it's perceived. They put down a lot of sign if they sleep there for 2 weeks straight. There's a lot more than 2 weeks in a season. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's not as easy as it's perceived. It's a lot of work.
That's the point to drive home, I think, again and again, because social media, it's easy to get tricked into thinking everybody's shooting big bucks in the fall and that's all you see. But I think for every buck you see, there's 5 or 10 guys that are striking out, and it's not as easy. And I don't know, it's just it's tough. So we gotta.
It's also, despite having all the tactics in the world, the number one thing is a little bit of luck on your side. And I think that a lot of these young guys really can get it done just by sheer determination. If they want it bad enough, if they push hard enough, they try hard enough, they can make a lot of mistakes and still get good deer. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Want and desire is a huge part of success. I mean, it's probably equal to knowing what you're doing. I mean, how bad you want it. You know what I mean? It's true. I mean, it's the same thing with sports or anything. Like the guys that, excel in sports because they want to win so bad, they try hard,
That was the story of my elk season. I'm still real green as an elk hunter, and I think I GPSed miled like 230 miles walking last season. So I tried hard and I had a lot of opportunities, but it's not because I'm a good elk hunter. It's just because I was willing my way into opportunities. And there's something to be said for that. And I think a lot of guys that I've talked to and heard, Joe Elsinger, when he was on The Hunting Beast, Andy May come to mind. All those guys talk about they had a season in their hunting lives where that's all they did is they spent lots and lots of time in the woods. Maybe they don't now and they're efficient, but there was a time where everybody did that to get that base of knowledge. We got the same question from 2 people. So John Ostrowski and Ashley Elizabeth Covert said, Dan, some of your most memorable hunts, and then maybe times that you messed up and didn't get the deer, memorable story about each.
Hi, Ashley. Memorable hunts. I think the most memorable one for me was my first real giant buck, my first real old buck, which was shot in 1989. It was a 10-pointer that I hunted for 4 years before I got him. I had both sheds from the year before. 1 shed from the year before that, and 1 shed from the year before that. So through the mid-'80s, I was picking up his sheds. I shot that buck in hindquarters once with the bow and didn't recover him. The next year, I killed him. I had a whole bunch of interactions with him. And I think that deer kind of taught me how to hunt. So there's not too many stories I didn't hear, so I'm probably boring, or haven't said, so I'm probably boring some people. But that buck, I started, I realized well before that buck that getting close to bedding was what killed deer, because you'd see them come out of the thick and they wouldn't get very far from there, So you knew you had to keep pushing. And I didn't have anybody to tell me that it's stupid to go near bedding, which was the common theme in those days. So I didn't make that mistake. I just kept going closer and having more and more success. So that buck got me so fired up. And we go back to that, what we were just talking about, the want. I wanted that buck so bad that I spent my entire winter and spring and into the summer searching every bedding area, every place I could find where that deer lived, and really learning everything I could about that deer, which was unheard of at that time. Nobody really spring scouted in those days, but I did. And I went out and I really pounded and I found all these spots and I figured out where I thought that deer was bedding. And I went in with a plan the next year is to hunt down all those bedding areas. And I didn't do really great with the bow. I had a couple close calls. I didn't have my setups down the way I do now. I had a couple times where the deer came out and I spooked them. I had a couple of times where I was off on my setup and he got by because I was too far back or off to the side. But those are your learning curves. You know what I mean? That's how you grow as a hunter. And the whole bow season went by and gun season came around, and I decided I was going to take my shotgun and sneak into all the bedding areas and try to jump him up and shoot him, you know, or shoot him in his bed. And I started doing that, and I started running across bucks, but not him. And I noticed that a lot of them were getting away on me and that they were watching straight downwind. So I started coming in on a cross angle, which worked a lot better. And it got to, you know, I got through the week and it got to Thanksgiving Day. And you know, my mom was really big about me being there for Thanksgiving because I kept ruining Thanksgivings. But so I begged to go out in the morning, and I went out and just for the morning to hunt. And I had a couple more bedding areas way in the back that I wanted to go into. And one of them was an old farm field that wasn't being farmed anymore. It had just grown into grass. But within that farm field was a draw that they didn't plant. And because it was too steep for the farm equipment. So they used it as a farm dump, which was really common back in those days. They dumped their garbage in there.
Yeah.
And in with the garbage was an old car. And when I went into that scouting in the spring, I found all these massive rubs and beds all around the car. But I mean, that wasn't the only spot I found that. So that was just one of the spots I wanted to check out. So I went there and I'm looking at that, like, how can I go in there? If I go in there a crosswind or whatever, if I go into that, the deer's going to come out the other side. It was just thick red brush, and you couldn't walk through broken glass and tin cans and stuff in that brush without making noise. So I thought about it, and I thought, well, if I get above it, you know, like in front of this draw up high, the draw went down towards the woods, and I knew where the beds were from scouting. They were around that car, and I could get a rock and throw it against that car. I thought maybe that deer would jump out and run out the side. So I did that, and when I had a big rock hit the top of that car, that buck erupted out of cover. And when I saw him, I just started unloading the gun. And I got to the point where I had shot a few rounds really haphazardly out of excitement.
Sure.
And realized I was doing that. At some point, I realized I had to calm down before the thing was out of range and carefully aim and shoot. And I figured I had a couple more shots left, and I got the sights kind of on them and shot, and then I went for the last shell, and guess what? The one I had just shot was, and it just went click. And I watched the thing just trot over the hill, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I blew it. And you go from the highest high that you finally got the thing to jump to the lowest low, the thing's getting away. And then I'm thinking, well, what can I do? There's a little bit of sparse snow, and I'm thinking maybe I can cut a track. I can figure out where he's going. I can go cut him off. So I started reloading, and I ran over to where I saw him last to try and see if I get his tracks, because he had ran around a corner, and see which way he headed into the woods. And when I got to where I last saw him, I was looking for his track, and I looked at the snow, and there's red blood sprayed all over everything. And then I looked to my left, and the thing's laying there dead. And that was a giant. I mean, the shortest brow tine was just under 10 inches, 9 3/4, I think. But just a beast. And I ruined another Thanksgiving. It was a mile back. I got my brother who was dressed up for Thanksgiving, and me and him spent the whole day dragging that thing out while my ma steamed. But that was a pretty memorable hunt.
And then what about maybe one that got away? Everybody likes those stories too.
Oh, one that got away. The most memorable one for me that still haunts me was in Iowa. I went hunting with, I had met some guy online. This is in the early 90s. I met a guy online, and he invited me to hunt with him down in Iowa. It was on, back in the days of, I think they had like, it was when computers were first getting big, and there was forums, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I met him on some forum, and it was like a swap hunt thing. And he told me that he was real green at hunting, didn't know much, and he really wanted some help hunting, and that I could come down and hunt with him in Iowa. You know, if I'd help him get on a deer. He'd never even shot a deer or whatever. And I'm like, all right. So he said he had this private property that we could hunt on, and it was really good, and there's a lot of bucks running around. He just didn't know what he was doing. I'm like, okay. So I apply, and I believe I got a tag the first year. I mean, that's how long ago this was.
The good old
year
days.
Yeah, I think it was zone 4 or whatever. So I go down there, and when I get there, he says, I got some really bad news. Or actually, I think it was before I even left, but it was right when I was going to leave. I'd already bought the license and everything. He says, I got some really bad news. I just assumed my friend was in on this, and it's his property. And he's really mad that I invited you, and he says you can't hunt on his property. And I'm like, well, what are we going to do? He's like, I don't know. He says, I talked to my wife, and her uncle's a big hunter, and she called him, and he says we can hunt on his property, and he kills some big deer. But you know, whatever. And I'm just like, well, okay, I guess we'll hunt there. So I drive down there, and when I get there, I find out that he doesn't even know this guy. It's like a distant uncle. His wife hasn't even met him. So I'm like, oh, okay. But they looked him up and called him or something because they were worried about how I'd feel about them kind of screwing me when I got the tag. So we go over to meet this guy, and the guy had a bunch of pretty big racks laying around in his garage. And he says, well, I'm a farmer. I don't bow hunt. I just gun hunt, and I only hunt opening day because that's all I can do because I own like a gazillion acres of farmland. And he goes, these are just deer we shoot on drives. He says, that's all we do. And but he says, you want to bow hunt here? He says, knock yourself out. He goes, I'll show you some of the spots. And he drives me out to this spot, and we get there, and there's it's all cattails, and there's one tree in the middle of the cattails. And he goes, they usually jump right by that tree. And I'm sitting there with a bow, and I mean, there's not even cover. It's, corn right up to the cattails and stuff. And I'm like, okay. He goes, I'll show you another spot. I figure you're looking for trees. So we go to this other spot, and we got to drive a ways to get there. And it's, he owns a ton of acreage, but it's all farm fields. So this property, he says, he promises me there's woods in it. And we get there, and we go down this long, like, farm road, and it's just fields. I'm like, where are the trees? And we get to the top of this hill, and we go over this hill, and there's this little square wood lot that's like about 4 acres. And as soon as we crest the hill, like 50 deer just run out of it, taking across all the fields. And he says, yeah, you can hunt this if you want. And I'm like, how do you get close to it? He goes, that's kind of a problem. Maybe you can get in there in the morning, but he says, it's not easy to get near them. He says, we usually can't even drive them because you go over the hill, they run. But you wanted trees, there's trees. So I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking, how can I make this work? Maybe if I get in there and sit there all day, I'm trying to figure something out, So I'm kind of looking, I'm like, okay, all right. And he goes, well, there's one more spot I'll show you. I'm like, okay. So he drives me to this other spot, and then we get there, and there's a river bottom. It's really laid out nice. It's really nice farm country. And I'm like, oh, this is sweet. And he said, yeah, you can hunt here too. And I'm like, all right, yeah. And now it's getting late, so I'm like, okay, let's just hunt. And then the guy that invited me down there, he couldn't hunt that night. He had to do something, but he's going to hunt the next day. So I said, I'm just going to jump in there. He's like, okay, because I had followed his truck when we were doing this. So I look at this, and I'm looking at the way the land lays, and I'm like, if I was a deer, I'd be over here. I'd be bedded there. I'd be going through here. That spot there looks good. So I go pick this tree out based on that. Never been on this property before. I get up in the tree, and about an hour later, it's getting to be that sunset time, and a small buck walks out, crosses the field. And a little while later, this about 150-inch buck comes walking out. and it's following the path of the little buck, which means it's not going to go past me. And all of a sudden it just turns on a dime and starts walking straight at me. It gets in front of me. And this is when I first started filming, and I'm trying to get this freaking camera working and stuff, and things getting out in front of me. And I shot at it, and I thought I smoked it. So I put the bow down and I get the camera on and I'm following it, and it runs right underneath me. It's standing at 5 yards underneath me, and I'm filming it, waiting for it to drop. And it's not dropping, and it's looking around alert. And I'm like, what the heck? And then I look, and you can see the wound is in the shoulder blade. And I had hit the shoulder blade, and the arrow must have just bounced out, and I thought I went right through it. And so then when I noticed that, I started getting another arrow out. I put the arrow out. It looked up at me when the arrow popped out of the quiver. Put the arrow on the string, and I got the bow half drawn when it ran. And that one I didn't recover it. And I looked all over the place, kind of burnt the area out. Now I got to look someplace else in the farm, and it's like, oh man. And now I got that other guy coming, and I got to put him someplace. So I'm like, what do I do now? So that guy shows up the next morning to hunt, and I felt kind of bad about this, but I didn't have nothing else. I'm just like, well, why don't you just sit that tree stand, that spot where I was? And I felt bad about that because, I think I kind of burnt it up, but
Yeah.
I had no place else for him to go. And there's a good chance there's be another deer in there, something else could come out. And I just went and hunted someplace else. And I had another buck come by, but not nothing I wanted to shoot. So afterwards, we meet up at my hotel room, and he comes in and he's like, dude, I saw the biggest buck of my life. He goes, this thing was a monster. He says, it was coming across the field. He says, and it stopped out about 50 yards out, and it was out of range, and I couldn't shoot that far. And remember, he's got no experience hunting. Yeah. And he says, this thing was, and he holds his arms up and he's holding them 30 inches wide, it's like it had 12 points, and I don't know about you, but I've been there before with people that don't have a lot of experience, and usually you see the buck and it's a 60-inch 8-pointer or something, So I'm like, all right, yeah. And he's like, I'm telling you, this is a huge buck. I'm like, well, I'll go back there, tomorrow and shoot it. And he's like, I can't. He goes, I was shaking so bad I couldn't kill it. He goes, I want you to go over there and hunt it. And I'm like, I think you should go back in there and hunt it. He goes, I can't. I couldn't even compose myself. He goes, this thing is so huge. We go over there together to kind of look where it was. And he says it was by this bush, and the field drops straight down where this bush is into an oxbow that's cut away, the outside of an oxbow into a fast running river. And he says the buck walk up to that bush and then drop down into the river. I'm like, that's like a sheer drop. He goes, yeah, but it did. And he goes, I don't know where it went from there. So we go walking over there, and as we're getting up to it, you see these tracks in the mud, and the tracks are like this. I mean, they're the biggest deer tracks I ever seen. It was like, holy crap, it was huge. So we follow the tracks up to where this thing dropped down into the river bottom. This is the same day. That was the morning when he saw this thing, right? So it's the same day. So we walk up to the river edge, and when we do, the oxbow on the other side of the river, that's lower. You know what I mean? So he couldn't see the oxbow from his stand because it's lower. This side of the river is higher ground. When we walk up to the edge and deer can see us from the top, the oxbow erupts and a whole bunch of deer get up, all bucks. There's like a whole bunch of bucks bedding in there for whatever reason, get up and start tearing off out of there. And one of them is this gigantic 12-pointer that's got to go 200 inches. And I'm like, oh my God. And he goes, there it is. And I'm like, holy crap. And it hauls off through this field. And I'm like, okay, now what do I do? So I get him to go back to that same stand, and I go over there, and I'm trying to find a way across this river. I can hunt the oxbow, but I can't hunt beyond it, and you can't get in from the sides. It's the land I can hunt on, but there's only, you have to cross this river to get to it.
Yeah.
So I ended up wading through really fast water, like up to my armpits, to get over there. Which was actually a good idea, because then I could go, and this is in the morning in the dark, but then I could get right up a tree that was on the edge of this oxbow with the wind blowing over the river and never sent anything up. You know what I mean? And I get in there and I find a tree, and it's kind of like dark, but I find a tree, and I get in there, and it starts getting gray light, and you can see there's a trail that comes into this oxbow that goes in front of me and turns broadside and then goes around behind me. And as it's getting lighter, I can see a little faint trail going straight underneath me. And I look up, and in the gray light, I see this buck coming. And as it's coming, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually you're realizing it's him. And he's coming right back to bed in the same spot. But he's coming from the other direction now, from across the field in the direction that he kicked when we jumped him. And this thing's coming, and it's getting bigger and bigger, and I just start shaking. You know, and this thing gets up to me, and where it's going to turn broadside in front of me, it never turns and just keeps going straight. It starts walking underneath me, and it's going to walk through me, you know, underneath my tree and bed behind me. And I know it's either going to smell where I walked, or it's going to get behind me and smell me, and I can't shoot behind me. And I'm like panicking. I get the bow back, and I tried shooting this thing right between the shoulder blades, right underneath me. And I hit it square between the shoulder blades, and there's this loud crack, and the thing just drops, and it's flailing around on the ground, spine shot. So like an idiot, I hooked my bow up and dropped my bow down. I'm going to race down this tree and get to this thing. It's flailing around. All I had to do is put one more arrow in it. I dropped this bow down. When it hits the ground next to the deer jumps to its feet and runs off. And we never found it. That's the one that got away that haunts me.
Yeah, that's a tough story there. Yeah, and roughly, Dan, what year was that? And I mean, hindsight's 2020, right? I'm sure you would have stayed in your stand and shot again. But what was that still earlier on, and what'd you learn from that?
I think that was early on in my career. I mean, I had a few big bucks on my wall at that time, but I would say probably mid 90s, probably not quite 95, maybe 94, somewhere in there.
Yeah, and you said you shot your first really big buck in '89, so that's not too long after that at all.
Yeah.
No. Well, geez, that's a tearjerker there. It's not every day you see a 200-inch deer and get a shot at it. So I bet you learned a lot, but you learned a lot the most painful way, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's do some live chat questions here. First one's from Zeke Outdoors. It's for me. It says, Jeremy, can you talk about the differences in mule deer and whitetails? Also, the differences in how they act, bedding styles, hunting styles. So I'll stick to what I know, which is Montana. You're going to find whitetails along water, so creeks, reservoirs, rivers, things like that. And in some areas now in the mountains, which is kind of weird. And then mule deer, typically more arid environment, so a lot less water, higher ground typically, or higher up in the mountains than you'd find the whitetails. And differences in how they act, I would say in general, mule deer need a lot less cover as far as like forest. Find them in a lot more open areas, or they'll just be in a little pocket of cover, you know, in an otherwise open area. But the one thing that I have noticed for sure that the hunting beast has helped me out on a lot is the bedding. So if you think of all the principles of hill country bedding, that's what I see with mule deer. You see them the top third a lot. You see them in bowls. You see them at the ends of points. That's where I find a lot of sheds when I'm shed hunting. So I think as far as bedding goes and where to find them, that's real typical. And one of the things I've noticed the last couple of years, and I've been trying to look for this on, you know, your mapping apps like Spartan Forge and stuff, in these areas that are more open, obviously look for trees for shade cover, especially if you're hunting early season. And the other thing I've noticed is kind of like, and these don't occur everywhere out here, but in Wisconsin, where you got that military crest where it's, you know, flat or slope, and then it goes down steeper where that changes. That's what Dan calls military crest. A lot of times just below that in the hills here, you'll see actual, and it's got to be from just, I would guess, hundreds of years of use. You'll find actual dugout little plateaus where the deer are bedding, and it's because just below that, in that dugout spot, they're shaded all day, you know, and they're almost always on the north side. So the sun's out of the south, they're on the north side. So I've been keying on that, looking for those military areas to try to find bucks, because common way, to hunt mule deer is to glass them in the morning when they're bedded. And that's a lot of the times you see them bedded. So I don't know, won't beat the mule deer hunting to death, but there's a lot of similarities. The biggest difference I'd say is the habitat, and they're a little less spooky at distance too. So if you're rifle hunting, they've got a bad tendency to stop and look at you instead of run away, or whitetail's more spooky. So I think that natural instinct of mule deer gets a lot of them killed, because they'll run out to 200 yards, they stop and look back at you, and that's when a lot of them get shot.
Speaking of mule deer, a little birdie told me is your girlfriend or your wife found something?
Oh yeah. So we were out shed hunting so it snowed here recently, but last weekend was nice. So we were out shed hunting, and we found a pretty good mule deer shed, which doesn't have a fork at the top, which is semi-common in Montana, but real good mass. It's a little over 5 inches at the base. So she's pretty good.
Whitetail.
Yeah, it does. It does look. My buddy shot a good one a couple of years ago now, 2020, I think. It was a 3x3. Looks like a whitetail, except it's 23 inches wide and it's got 15-inch tines. So pretty good there. Yeah, and I guess one other quick thing: if anybody's looking to hunt Montana, the application deadline is April 1st. So get your apps in if you're going to do it. And on my channel, I did do a video about the application process, because it's pretty confusing. So if you guys want to check that out, you can find that there. Let's see, what else do we got here? Habitual Pursuit says, we've noticed in Ohio many deer are holding their antlers further into the spring. Care to share your opinion on why they're holding so long?
Mild spring. So here's my take on that. We have a hard winter. Ice and snow, heavy. Deer get a little starvation going. They drop a lot of the antlers in December. And we don't have much snow like this year, and it's kind of mild. We have deer that hold all the way till now. I know from people who have pens that I know who have pen deer that track sheds have told me that the same deer year after year tend to drop their sheds within like 24 hours of the time that they dropped them the year before. It's but that's in a scenario where they have all they want. They're not under any stress. So those deer those pen deer tend to hold them a lot longer than the wild deer. But again, the whole thing is that stress makes them drop earlier. So if you have a mild year, they're going to hold longer. If you have a harsh winter, they will drop earlier.
That's it's been my experience also. And then I've heard, I'm not a scientist, so this is just what I've heard or read, that if there's a bad buck to doe ratio, a lot of times the buck's testosterone will stay higher later into the year. So maybe if you got a lot of does in your area and only a couple bucks, that could be a possible explanation too. But I've also read a lot of it, like you said, Dan, is genetic, and bucks will shed relatively the same time each year if everything else is similar. Let's see. Lewis Buckovich, Uncle Lou, says the open season show was so packed on Saturday, I've never seen anything like it since doing shows in 2008. So it sounds like real busy.
Yeah, last time I saw shows like that was probably in the 90s. Saturday. It was so packed. It was unbelievable.
Good to see a resurgence. I think still probably a little bit of pent up demand from COVID, right? When all that stuff was going on, all the shows were canceled, and now that people can get back to those, probably making them popular again.
Shows have been starting to suck. Really, where who's there for vendors, and who's there for is publicly known. But this show, that Dell's show, tends to be one of the better ones. A lot of cool people there that show up, and the building is really cool. I mean, they got statues. The whole thing's carpeted. You can go across. The family can go across the street and swim at the parks. I mean, it's just, there's restaurants everywhere. You're not going to get mugged. I mean, it's a pretty good show.
Yeah. Well, Dan, unfortunately, looks like my connection, which just does this sometimes. We're getting some comments that the stream is buffering pretty bad today. So I don't know why it does that. I think occasionally does that. So we'll do a couple more, and then I'm going to save this live chat and questions we didn't, because we're on an hour right now. Questions we didn't get to today, we'll come back, get to them, and hopefully we'll have a better connection next time. So
I was going to tell you, just before I got on the show today, I took Carol out to Mexican restaurant like I do every Tuesday. We always go out to eat. And we left. Everything was cool. We came home, and a big tree in the yard had fell on Rat Slayer's car and smashed it.
Oh, no.
Yeah. He just bought a new one, and the new one's fine, but his older car, his backup car, it destroyed the door and the passenger door and the window, and pretty much screwed the car up. You might have to scrap it. And he just took his insurance off of that car and put it on the other one.
Oh, no. Terrible timing, huh?
Yeah.
That's terrible.
Yeah. Anywho, get back to the questions.
Yeah, we'll do one or two more here, and like I said, we'll wrap up, and then I'll save these questions for next time. Let's plan on doing one more Q&A week, and then we'll get another guest on maybe the following week. So David Burrows says, Dan, thanks so much for signing your books for me. Great reads. Everyone should own his books. Are you making any more stands? I'm assuming that means any different varieties of stands.
Yep, working on them now. Just bringing a prototype to Mario to be reviewed, because I think I'm done with it. I'm going to be having that meeting in a week or so.
Nice. There's a question here about the flannel, and Uncle Lou answered. He says, shout out to Dan and Mario, collaboration for the project on the new B-Scare plaid. It's not a flannel. It's a printed polyester plaid. This dog hunts. I'll stop there and enjoy the show.
He gets mad at me when I call it flannel.
Yeah.
It's not flannel, but pretty cool. Looks flannel. Just get that cool flannel look.
And then let's see. Dan, let's go ahead and wrap it up there, because I'm getting error message. I don't want to keep doing questions if they're not going to come through. So apologize to everyone that we're having some technical difficulties. That's just my internet service provider, unfortunately. So we will try again next week and try to optimize a little more. So hopefully that connection is better. So
alrighty.
We'll see everybody next week, 7 Central. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll get to them then. Like I said, we'll save these and run through the rest of them. So thanks everyone for joining, and